Good evening and welcome to the BS and Beer Show. Of course, BS stands for Building Science. Tonight's topic is building for sensitivity, from low VOC to environmental allergens. I already introduced myself, but I will carry on and just remind you guys that BS and Beer is an independent grassroots movement to share building science knowledge through local meetup groups and this, our Zoom show. The brew crew and our guests volunteer our time each month to bring you what we hope is a fun and informative discussion. We encourage you to start your own local group, and for information on how to get started, you can visit the bsandbeershow.com and also check out our December 2022 show. A lot of you have been taking that to heart. There is a massive movement growing that you're all a part of. I think we added 4 new chapters just in January. So if you are an Instagram follower, you can find those by typing at BS and Beer or BS underscore and Beer. And then you'll just get the phone book. It's like 37 chapters strong. So congrats to all of you that are participating. Find the chat box icon at the bottom of your screen, and you want to post your questions and comments there. Be sure when you do that to click all panelists and attendees, or everyone. Otherwise, Zoom always wants to revert back to panelists only, and then no one knows what you're saying except for us, and we're trying to run a show, so we might miss it. The video recording of tonight's show will be available at Green Building Advisor, and all past shows can be found there as well, and also on YouTube through a link at thebsandbeershow.com. Of course, I want to thank our media partners, Green Building Advisor, as well as Fine Home Building Magazine. And now we'll turn it over to Emily.
Hey everyone, I am Emily Mottram. As most of you know from January's, I did dry January, which means today's February 1st. There's absolutely nothing to drink in my house. So in support of my Canadian friends, I am drinking water out of my Energy New Brunswick mug. I also teach a class right before this, so it seemed great not to start with beer that. I'm an architect here in Maine, and tonight I want to give you a couple of announcements. The first one is that all 4 regular hosts for the BS and Beer Show are going to be at the International Builder Show. So if you guys are going to the International Builder Show in Las Vegas, February 27th through 29th, make sure that you catch up to us. Unfortunately, the symposium before the show is sold out. So if you didn't sign up, I'm sorry, get on board next year. In the meantime, courtesy of our friends over at Sashco, we're going to pop a link in the chat box for free expo passes to the show. So if you're coming out to Las Vegas, we'll go ahead and put that on there. So that's February 27th and through 29th out in Las Vegas. On March 7th and 8th, we would typically have had our regular BS and Beer show, but we want to support the other people who are doing awesome building science things, and Passive House Accelerator is hosting a groundbreaking 24-hour global online conference called the Reimagining Buildings 24. They're going to go around the globe highlighting new innovative building projects every single hour. So we'll post a link to get tickets to the show. Normally we would have a show, but we're all going to watch Passive House Accelerator. So pop on over there and do that. We'll make sure that goes out in the newsletter as a reminder that we want to support what Passive House Accelerator is doing, which is really exciting. And Travis already told you about the symposiums coming up, so we'll make sure we get a link in the chat box about the symposiums for this year for 24. And now off to Mike to introduce himself and our guest.
Or thank you, Emily. I'm Mike Maines, designer in Maine. Tonight I am drinking an Austin Street Brewing smoked brown ale. I'm excited to break into that. I've never had it before, but I'm on a brown ale kick lately. Let's see, our guest tonight is Corinne Segura. She is a certified building biology practitioner and an InterNACHI certified moisture intrusion inspector, along with a lot of other accolades. She is a contributor at Green Building Advisor, and perhaps most importantly for tonight's topic, she has survived extreme chemical and mold sensitivities herself. Corinne founded and runs My Chemical Free House. I'll put a link to that in the chat. And there she shares research and articles to help people create homes for those with environmental sensitivities. And I believe I forgot, Corinne, you also do consulting, is that right?
Yeah, I've done about 8 years of consulting, usually with highly environmentally sensitive folks. So folks are very sensitive to VOCs and other chemicals.
Nice. It's notable to me that I think I've known you, or we've been corresponding now for 5 or 6 years, and this is the first time we've ever talked in person. So just, it's funny how the internet works.
Yeah.
Is there anything I missed? I mean, in the introduction, anything you want to
No,
add?
just that I'm drinking some marshmallow root tea in case my throat acts up.
That sounds nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I know you have a presentation, so feel free to kick us off with your presentation or start wherever you like. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I was thinking to go pretty fast through it. Otherwise, it could take the whole hour. So I'm going to try and just, each slide pretty quick. And then I think questions after, just because otherwise, yeah, we could get really into it. Okay. So let me know if this works.
Perfect.
Good. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the 10 materials I would not use in a healthy home. And this is all about like how it affects the occupant. So I'm not addressing like the environmental concerns or like the global warming potential. That's just a different topic and a little bit outside my scope, but I might mention it here and there. But mainly this is about VOCs, which are the gases like formaldehyde, semi-VOCs, which are things like phthalates and flame retardants, and then non-volatile chemicals, which are things like lead. So everyone's favorite insulation, 2-part spray foam is what I would not use. So you guys did an episode all on 2-part spray foam, which was really great. So I'm not going to repeat obviously all those points, but one point that I think is important, that it does seem to off-gas more than expected or more than even what the official VOC rating is on the brand or on the product. And that's just something that chemically sensitive people can easily pick up. The smell is obvious of the off-gassing, and this is when it's done right. So not when something's gone horribly wrong and it's not cured and all that, all those major problems that can happen. So there is some off-gassing, a few years, 1 to 3 years, it seems. And I think that's just way, way too risky for someone with multiple chemical sensitivities or other environmental illnesses. Or for anyone that just wants an ultra low VOC home. I just don't think it's the way to go. I think there's enough alternatives. There's also the flame retardants, which is usually Tris, the flame retardant called Tris. And that is, there's definitely obviously health concerns with that, but it's not usually a trigger for people with environmental sensitivities. It's usually more the gases, but that doesn't mean that it's just completely harmless. And then some of them advertise like soy or castor oil. This is the thing with all polyurethane foams. It's really confusing because you'll see like it's soy foam, but it's really just soy is one of the components that goes into making one of the components of the spray foam, and it doesn't change the chemical, the end product. And then we know that there's also like the problem with the two-part is like all the mixing and everything that can go wrong. All the exact conditions that need to take place on site. So I'm not really that concerned with the can spray foam, unless someone was so sensitive that they didn't do well with that. But usually it seems to off-gas quite quickly. So yeah, the next. This is, I'm not going to go into detail. It's just a client's house where the spray foam seemed to have gone somewhat wrong, at least somewhat wrong. And they're just unusual. It didn't smell good in there. It smelled pretty bad in there. And that was just a cathedral ceiling too. It wasn't all the walls. So the second thing is vinyl sheet. I have 3 floorings that I would avoid. This was the first one. Vinyl sheet, obviously not used in high-end homes, but very popular in mobile homes. Basically the main flooring in trailers, and can still be used in like a kitchen of a home. So it's quite high in off-gassing, one of the highest off-gassing for VOCs and plasticizers, which could be still phthalates. So luxury vinyl plank, luxury vinyl tile, it basically is phthalates have been completely eliminated, and they also are very, very low, and almost some of them are 0 off-gassing. So this is a very different product from luxury vinyl plank. Could still have phthalates. It's obviously a very cheap flooring, but it's it's just up there with the worst for me. Similar to mass loaded vinyl, which is for soundproofing. also just very high in odor, very high in off-gassing. And yeah, the rigid plank is much better. Oh, I just wanted to say, like, people often call this linoleum, but technically linoleum is the natural product made from linseed oil and binders. And that's just a completely different product that has like it's almost entirely natural. It's vapor open, doesn't have plasticizers, and the VOCs are all just the natural odors of. So calling them both linoleum is really confusing. And if this was in an older house in a renovation, I would remove it just because the phthalates are always coming out. So even if it's completely off gas with the VOCs, the phthalates just continually come out and leach out. So the third flooring type I wouldn't use is rubber, and this is just for gyms, but since COVID, a lot of people are doing home gyms, and unfortunately it's high in off-gassing, and there's a lot of other contaminants in it, especially when it's made from recycled tires that I would definitely avoid. But it's the only flooring, as far as I understand, because I'm not an expert in gyms or like high intensity workouts, but I understand that there's certain workouts that can only be done on this type of flooring, like those really like pushing sleds or those kinds of things that are like really, really intense. So in that case, I would definitely not go with the recycled. I would go with the virgin rubber, and I would go with the vulcanized because it kind of eliminates a few of the glues, but it's still high in off-gassing. I would have like a lot of air exchange in that room for sure. And that would really be for someone that was healthy and didn't have environmental illness or sensitivities. Okay, so, oh no, my last flooring is some carpet. So carpet can range from completely zero VOC now to still quite like I'd say very high in off-gassing on my scale as someone that's sensitive. So nylon is usually, that's the more typical fiber, and that's usually higher in off-gassing than some of the newer polyester. So the highest off-gassing like sequence that you would have would be like a nylon that's like pretty typical. And if you glued it down, those are usually really harsh too. And then if your padding is either the rebonded polyurethane, which is polyurethane bits like all glued together, so the glue is off-gassing, or even a memory foam has some off-gassing. Then there's also flame retardants that are added. They could be antimony based, or they could be aluminum based. PFAs, this is the forever chemical stain guard treatments. It's still pretty common. We're definitely moving towards removing them, but like this would be like the worst concoction. And there's a whole slide just on PFAs. So if anyone doesn't know what that is, there's more. And then also antimicrobials, which are not usually like declared. I haven't seen lately like one that's actually saying what it is. So that would be like the worst. And then the best would be, there's 2 zero VOC polyester lines, brands. And even the padding is like a felt. It's like a synthetic felt, but there's no off-gassing there either. And I wouldn't glue down, and I wouldn't, yeah, ideally it's tacked down. But, and there's also natural wool carpet, which is really, really beautiful actually. Not just any brand, there's a couple brands, and I have an article on carpet. Like I have an article on, it's called Healthiest Carpet Brands. And it goes through all the brands there. So there's a couple really good wool. There's 2 zero VOC polyester, and there's a nylon brand that is very, very low in off-gassing. So if you weren't like super sensitive, and yeah, you could go with that. And so yeah, a lot of those brands are moving away from the PFAs, which is a big chemical of concern. I think that might be the next slide. No, okay. So this is not just caulking, but sealants, this category. So I would avoid the highest off-gassing, definitely the liquid asphalt products. So used on a roof, but there's alternatives for that. Hot mopping, I know that's really kind of a California old school thing, but I'd still avoid that. Less concerned about the liquid asphalt that's used on the foundation below grade. I know that's also not like a high performance thing anymore, but in terms just of like avoiding chemicals. It's not as bad. I think just because it's thinner, I'm not sure, but it's not as harsh. But if you could avoid it, that'd be good too. So butyl caulks and sealants are often really harsh, and even polyurethane, and even the low VOC brands I find take way longer to off-gas than comparable polyether. So I would try and go with all silicone and polyether, sil terminated polyether. And within the polyether category, there's so many. There's like roofing, and there's like, you know, for countertops, and there's so many. Even excuse me. Even just for like caulking around like a sink or something, there's both polyether and silicone. And the only thing you'd have to check is like a warranty, like for a shower. If you have like in some kind of engineered stone or something for the shower, there might be a warranty that says like you have to use this type of caulking. You might, even though polyether would probably work, one of the polyethers, it might void the warranty, and countertops and other, I'm sure there's other areas too. All right, so the PFAs are the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They are mostly stain guard chemicals. Are known as the forever chemicals because they're just so highly persistent in the environment. But I think the last I saw was like, we don't know how long it'll take for them to break down. And there's also health concerns. So they're used as stone sealers. Most countertop stone sealers are based on PFAs. Like that's the like active ingredient. And especially for white stone, you're more limited. Floor sealers, artificial turf, sofas, carpet. So there's been big movements. Minnesota is banning PFAs in textiles 2025. The original bill was for 2024, which means, I mean, they extended it, but it meant that like we already saw like major movements. Sofa companies have made major movements towards non-PFAs on their fabric, and the carpet industry is like moving pretty fast too. So obviously that's just one state, but usually that starts to like shift a lot of things. And then Maine, bringing in a full ban. They've already passed that for 2030, all household products that have PFAS. So, so far there are not, like the alternatives don't work as well. That's what I'm seeing in like industry papers, but there are some really, depending on like what the product is. Like for stone, I really like this product called Soapstone Sealer, which is based on walnut oil, and it actually works better than the synthetics, but it can't be used on white stone. So that's why I was saying like note white stone, because if you're chemically sensitive, like you have to consider all the products that go along with the choice. Like you're picking your shower, you need to know like the adhesive. You're picking your countertops, you need to know the sealer and the adhesive too. So just for those, sometimes, I mean, it's ideally like the builder is aware of those as well, so that because the client might not think of that, they might just be like looking for the prettiest stone and then be like, oh no, what do I seal it with? So I guess this one's probably not surprising, but oil-based paint and primers are high in VOCs. I've seen this usually like the bathroom primers to add a little more water resistance are often oil-based, or not often, but sometimes still oil-based. And then the paint for the trim and doors is sometimes still water-based. So we now have the water-based alkyd paints, which are just far, far, far better. Even if they're like not zero VOC, they're still pretty fast to off-gas and just a way better product. For the bathroom, there's like stain, what are they called? Stain blocking primers that would have like the same vapor permeance if you were looking for that as the oil-based primers. And on the same note as solvent-based stains for wood, so any of the conventional ones are high in VOCs, pretty slow to off-gas. They do look nicer usually than the water-based stains, which are finicky usually. So that's the downside of the water-based stains. It's nice if the contractor has some experience with the water-based stains so they know how it's going to turn out, or do some sample pieces or something. But I really like the natural oil-based stains and wood finishes like Rubio Monocoat. Like this photo actually is Rubio Monocoat, the floors, so it can look really nice. It has like that matte finish. I mean, it is a little bit different in the application and the upkeep and everything, so you have to learn about it. And Rubio Monocoat can be applied with a solvent. It comes with a solvent, or you can also apply it just the part A without the solvent. And the solvents are not as harsh. There are also better solvents like tung oil, which is the most durable natural oil, can be applied with citrus solvent, which has like a really harsh odor, but like it goes down quickly and it's actually not technically toxic. So, and then once it goes down, it'll just be like a natural slight orange smell. All right, so fiber boards and particle boards, medium density fiber board, high density fiber board, and particle board. Still mostly made with formaldehyde. Each of them now has a formaldehyde-free version or brand. Some of those are a lot better. Some of them have an undisclosed glue, so I don't really know if they're better, other than like what like a chemically sensitive person might report on it. And some of them are made with MDI glues, which off-gas isocyanates. So not necessarily better than formaldehyde in my view. Plywood though is very fast to off-gas. So if that, depending on what, part of the cabinets can be plywood, or if you're doing like a closet system, that might work as a swap. Some swaps are easy, like solid wood baseboards instead of MDF. And other swaps are obviously going to be trickier. Like these are some cabinet samples. And yeah, it's difficult to get cabinet doors that are all solid wood. You could get the boxes made out of plywood, and then usually there's a little bit of MDF in the doors, but it's not going to be a big deal to have a little bit, especially if someone's not sensitive or not very sensitive. But I think this category is just something to see if there's any areas where you can limit the formaldehyde and the MDI glues. The last slide is tiles with lead. So the tiles pictured are from a very big box store in the US. It's a brand that's well known if you know anything about tiles. They tested 3 milligrams per centimeter squared of lead, which is 3 times higher than leaded paint. There was another, actually it was also blue. It's not only blue tiles that have lead, but the other one, it was more of a no-name brand that tested also at about 3 milligrams per centimeter squared. And I tested 64 tiles and with XRF testing. So it's a very accurate testing. So in total it was, there were other tiles that came in below that level of leaded paint, but were still like significant. Like if once you're cutting it, once you've got the dust around you, then, I mean, you'd have to technically measure the amount in the dust to know what the risk is, but still anything around this mark of like lead containing paint is definitely a risk, and people don't really know about it. And people aren't testing the tiles before cutting them. It's worse in demolition because this has improved with time. So like just looking at my result of 12.5%, and I looked at 2 other studies, like I think in the last 10 years, and like it was worse, and it's progressively gotten better. So in a demolition, it's even more likely for the tiles to contain lead. And yeah, it's a significant amount. And I wish we, and these were not marked as like Prop 65. They didn't have any notification on these tiles about, yeah, that they contained lead. So that's the end of the 10 products. I just wanted to say, like mold is highly related to multiple chemical sensitivities. MCAS is also like a kind of allergic condition and other environmental sensitivities. And also, like when you're doing an unusual material swap, it requires a lot of attention to details that you're not messing up like your whole assembly, and you're not like screwing up something with the whole moisture management. So I just wanted to say those two things that we're tying in. And this is my Facebook page where I make a lot of announcements there, like the ban of PFAs, for example, and like where, now you can find couches without PFAs and how that ban is like progressing, that kind of thing. All right. Okay. I think I did that pretty fast. As fast as I
Running
could.
through it.
I was gonna say that was great. Were a lot of questions, so hopefully Mike was paying attention.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen so many
Like,
questions. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I think we got more questions from your or presentation than we've ever had during a presentation, which is great. Or before we jump into it, just could you explain just a little bit for those of us who aren't as familiar, like what is multiple chemical sensitivity, water environmental sensitivity? Are they related to things like Lyme disease or mold, or just what's a quick overview of what is
Yeah.
this thing we're worried about?
Multiple chemical sensitivities is really like for anyone that has like a reaction to formaldehyde, scents, fragrance, any VOCs, you can be like just self-diagnosed really, because it's really just a practical thing that you need to know. 25% of the population has some kind of chemical sensitivity. So that's a really high amount. And that might just mean people that are like kind of adverse to fragrance, but still, they may want a very low VOC house. There are other environmental illnesses like asthma is, in that category. I had a lot of clients that would have like these lung diseases that I didn't know anything about and still don't really know about, but I did learn just that there are other environmental illnesses and conditions, like especially related to breathing, that led to people coming to me. A lot of people also were cancer survivors, and they just wanted to avoid, they had sort of different needs. They're not necessarily like sensitive to chemicals, but they just want to avoid those like Prop 65 chemicals of concern. And
Yeah.
mold tends to underline. I don't know about cancer. I can't like speak to those big ones, but mold tends to underline like multiple chemical sensitivity and these sensitivities.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and that you talked about environmental sensitivities too, because we often strive to kind of take some of these chemicals and stuff out of our house, and then we still had a homeowner who was allergic to their house. Turns out they might have been allergic to pine or pinene or whatever that is, which is kind of a really difficult thing to get rid of when we build a lot of things with pine. And is often an alternative. We're trying to use more wood and whatever, and get rid of some things that have plastics and other stuff in it. And so that was a new one for me, which just brings a lot to light. But also someone who had some pretty high levels of mold exposure. So very fascinating.
And Kylie asked before the show, something that's never talked about is the impact of indoor environmental quality on mental health. We always hear about asthma, physical repercussions, things like that of poor indoor air quality. What are the impacts on mental health? Is it being studied? Do you have any findings or research or experience with that?
I don't research the health effects. It's just not my area of expertise. I just see like what's going on in the community, having worked with so many people, that I've seen, like, I don't know if this is the only link, but I've seen a very strong link to depression, anxiety, and even OCD with mold. But that's obvious. Yeah, that's just from the community.
I think I know that Mike has a whole slew of questions, but while he's queuing up the next one, I think from the builder side, a lot of these things are not that hard to avoid. Some of them are, but a lot of them, as you pointed out, like Rubio Monocoat it's a beautiful product. Like it's generally considered an upgrade that people are pleased to invite And it also is very easily repairable. So even
Yeah.
families really like that aspect of it. Use it on countertops, use it on floors, any of these cabinet finishes. It's kind of, if you have an extra 20 minutes, go online and just follow that Instagram thread. It's artful the way the guys trowel it into the finish. It's really beautiful. So there are a lot of things that it doesn't have to cost more. It doesn't have to be an awful sidestep of what you would normally do to make these improvements. Just from the contractor's perspective, it's not
Yeah.
the end of the world to not get to use the one thing that you usually use. A lot of these materials are readily available and an easy swap, as you pointed out in your presentation.
I thought there were some pretty comments in the chat about if you have a skunk in your house, take it out and don't put a skunk in your house afterwards. That was relatively entertaining. But I think to highlight what you said, Travis, is if we can make several choices that allow us to get rid of some of these things, especially that don't add more, I was particularly, when Dr. Joe talks, everybody listens anyway, but 2 years ago at IBS, he said, we can't ventilate out all of the things that we're putting in our house, but if we can get rid of some of them, maybe we can use ventilation. And so one of the questions that's in the chat box was, do you have a recommendation for indoor air quality monitors?
Unfortunately, like the cheap, so I'm not like, I haven't gone really deep into this, but I know that the cheap ones are just not that great. If I was going to do testing, I would hire a company that comes in to do it. And usually it's going to be like taking the actual air samples. I think that's a good idea. I don't know if the little, I've tried like the little meters, the little boxes, but yeah, I don't know. They seem to like be giving like false positives, and then it really concerns people. And I don't know. I think it'd be better to just hire a company to do the air test and see, and you get a very detailed like accounting of everything, and then you can actually look into it in a real way.
Do you have familiarity with the Indoor Air Plus program? I know Robbie Schwartz is on here. He's a big proponent of a lot of these types of programs. And, frankly, I'm invested in that side of things too. So I was just curious if you have any experience with that, or if you believe in a program like that. If you have comments.
No, I don't know a lot about it. Do you guys have more information?
It's a giant sidebar. We have 36 other questions that we should probably
Okay.
address that you can't address. So let's do that.
Okay.
And you called out Robbie, so Robbie, throw some stuff in the chat box.
Yeah, he's an expert on that. So we can do more on that. We should have Robbie on sometime to talk about the EPA stuff. But anyway, do you want to go with maybe Bob Kelly, who talks about recently spraying a waterborne lacquer type paint for the first time? I think he's raising an important point in his question. He says the chemicals that were in this waterborne lacquer type paint were definitely caustic, and he was curious if you had familiarity with these products where it's sort of in my view, he's calling out a bait and switch. He's identifying hey, this is a green product, this is friendly, this is water, this isn't oil based, but then they include all of these other things that are actually far worse. Can you give some guidance there on particular products that we can sort of avoid stepping in that trickery?
So it depends if you're asking as a contractor or as a home builder, because I think he might be talking about like a cabinet paint. Some of those could be really high VOC, even if they're water-based. So yeah, a lot of products just say water, like advertise water-based as if that's just totally fine. So yeah, they could be high VOC, but the other thing to look for if you're the homeowner is that it may cure really fast. So if alcohol is one of the major solvents, I guess that's not even technically water-based, but if alcohol's fast to off-gas, but really harsh when wet. Acetone's also fast to off-gas, but harsh when wet. And then products like the picture on the slide about particle board was Craft Made. And if you looked at their SDS, the safety data sheet, it would show like really high VOCs, but because it's UV cured in the factory when it comes to you, and UV curing usually gets rid of the VOCs in the final product. So that's another thing you can look for as the consumer, I guess, and as the contractor, because you don't have to do the curing. Like you're not there for the curing either. So that's also good.
Right. That's a win.
One question I had when you were talking about linoleum, you didn't mention whether real linoleum also has issues. I know it's natural cork and linseed oil, but does that have off-gassing or any impacts on health?
It does technically have some VOCs. I don't remember the exact level, but the VOCs are all the natural, like Emily was saying about like how pine can give off. Yeah, so there's pine resin in natural linoleum and there's linseed oil, and those are the major odorants. And they do tend to like still come out over time because if it heats up, like if the sun's hitting it, it'll be more obvious. And that can go on for quite a while. I don't consider it harmful, but there's a difference between like what's harmful and like what triggers people. But yeah, I think it's a great product, and it's, yeah.
Okay. In general, is there a difference between like natural VOCs and ones that are more like chemical, like more like laboratory derived, or is a VOC a VOC?
They're usually like a whole different, like apinine is like, not something you would find in paint. Like it's usually like a totally different list. Well, there's a few things that overlap, like formaldehyde. So formaldehyde, there was one like case study, I guess it was. They measured a log cabin. Everything was wood, like the whole thing was wood, like all, the walls and the floor and the furniture and obviously the whole construction. And the levels were higher. I think the levels were higher than what CARB allowed. So the California Air Resource Board has the limits for formaldehyde. So you could actually reach, and that would probably only be a concern for sensitive people, but it's kind of interesting just the fact that like we don't, I would say, Len, like I'm not a scientist in this that studies formaldehyde, but like we almost don't know where, like, because there's formaldehyde outside, there's formaldehyde everywhere, cities, forests, everywhere. So there's obviously like an amount that's okay, but like trying to figure out where it is like where the science is, where the science is trying to figure it out.
There were several questions about spray foam and whether there were any spray foams that off gas less or that are better, or whether canned foam falls in the spray foam category. Are there any of those that are?
I would say none of the brands that are two-part. And you guys talked a lot about even like how the installers are like the very important part of the equation, but they could also be changing quickly. Cans spray foam is way better, partly because it's one part. So there isn't like this whole mixing and getting like the temperature right and all this kind of thing. And it's small and it's thinner and like smaller amounts, and that just allows the off-gassing. I had this project, which it's too much to explain, but like we had this really thick amount of can spray foam, like maybe like this, like a ridiculous, like you're not supposed to do that. And it was off-gassing because it couldn't, like it was yeah. So spray foam used normally is just really thin, but there could be really, really chemically sensitive people that don't do well with it. So they would need to know that. They would need to test that product like way ahead of time and know that, and then like request like, caulking tapes and other things.
It looks like Mike has queued up the elastomeric sealants question, but I want to answer one first because I like to look smart when I'm around smart people. So Mark Rosenbaum asked, what makes a vinyl plank luxury? And I wanted to answer that because the answer is marketing. Marketing is what makes a vinyl plank luxury. That is all. But I'm sure there's a more chemical perspective that Ring could offer.
I was literally going to type that in the chat box, like as soon as Mark wrote that down.
So I tried to think of a snarky answer, but I couldn't. So
usually the luxury vinyl plank could also be called like the rigid, what's it called? Rigid multi-layer or something. There's other ways, like, companies like to invent their own name so that they sound like they've like invented a different product, but usually it's an SPC core. So it's limestone, vinyl, plasticizers in the core. Sometimes there's wood, but just to simplify. And then there's the vinyl layer on top, which is more like it's softer. And then there's usually like just like a cheap foam underlayment on the bottom. So it's a multi-layer, thicker, rigid. The limestone definitely cuts down on the vinyl a lot. And brands with those 3 layers have qualified as 0 VOC. And I do think that's accurate. Like, I don't think they're like fudging the numbers.
It's encouraging. Every once in a while you get a win, right?
Yeah, well, the plastic, vinyl's terrible for the environment, but that is slightly off topic.
That's
So are the
not what we're
cans
talking
or the
about
one
today.
part spray foam. There's a lot of things that we're not addressing every issue here in the show tonight. We have to
Yeah.
focus.
Yeah.
So to address Todd's question about elastomeric sealants, like caulking that you would do with backer rod and caulking around a window, for example, or any elastomeric sealant. He specifically mentioned Big Stretch. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I think it's an acrylic, if I'm
Mhm.
remembering. So acrylic is not too bad. So I would say silicone and polyether, still terminated polyether are the best. And then acrylic, especially if you're not sensitive, is like just like a little bit higher off gassing.
Cool.
But
I
there's a
didn't mean to steal your
polyether,
thunder, Mike. Sorry.
there's a polyether replacement for basically everything that I've seen. I don't know that there isn't, other than the warranty issue.
Yeah, I pulled up the MSDS and I was like, oh, this is all fine. I'm not worried about this. And I pumped about a cartridge and a half just before I got to the show. So I wanted to make sure I was safe before I contaminated everything here.
Somebody asks, their 1929 house has a particle board kitchen, probably from the 1960s to 80s. The house has vinyl floors glued over hardwood from the same era. Are they done off gassing? Extrapolated, how long do products in place typically off gas or present an issue?
So particle board formaldehyde, a lot of products have moved towards phenol formaldehyde, which off gases faster. So if it's an older product, or when we saw some of those, like there was maybe I shouldn't even say the brand, but there was a big flooring store that had like a huge formaldehyde. Yeah, it had to do a huge recall because they had used urea formaldehyde, which off gases a lot more. But from that time frame, both should be off gassed. There's the timeframes are really tricky because, first of all, it's how dense the product is. So like fiberboard is different than particle board, because particle board is like a looser, depends on the airflow, depends on the temperature. But yeah, a few years is I'm just gonna say a few years. And then the vinyl floor could have, how old's the vinyl floor? Really old?
In this case, it was from the same era, so probably between the 1960s and 80s. So say 40 to 60 years.
I think phthalates were used back then. Yeah, so there could be, and they tend to leach out for the lifetime of the product, but yeah.
Okay.
There were a lot of questions about lead. Like, how do you tell whether there was lead in your tiles? How do you find 100% lead-free faucets or other products like that? So, is there any protocol for finding things that are lead-free, or do any of these tile manufacturers, like you mentioned where you got your tiles, but is there places that people are supposed to kind of say, like, this tile is lead-free? Like, how do you identify that?
I have a list of brands that have really stated clearly their policy on that. So those might be better. It's not a guarantee. If you really wanted to be sure, you could either do the XRF, hire someone to come in with the XRF. It's like a gun, like analyzer. Or you could just take the precautions with the dust as if it had lead. So I guess whichever's easier in your area. So like Dell Tile is a good one. They seem to like have quite a good track record of like their policy matching the testing, but their red tile, they're very clear. Their red tile still has lead. So at least they make it clear. I think bright red is a color that, so if you have some kind of mosaic with bright red, that can't really be achieved without lead so far, or maybe it's just really difficult. I don't know, but
Interesting. Is lead only an issue if you touch it? Is it direct lead poisoning, or is there some like airborne component that's an issue?
no, it's just the dust when you're cutting, when you're installing, and when you're demolishing. So the only issue would be like after it's installed, the only issue would be if it was a countertop and then you were like letting your tomatoes like sit on the countertop and it would like leach.
Right.
But tile countertops are not really in style, so I think it'll probably be okay.
And definitely not red countertops. Sorry, all of you red fans. You cannot have a red tile
Yeah,
countertop.
not yet. You just wait. It'll come back.
Patience
It
is a
will
virtue.
too.
Uh, is there a flooring? This is an obvious question from Peter Molinar. Is there a flooring product commonly used in institutional settings that doesn't adversely affect those with high sensitivity to VOCs?
Yeah, I really like polyurethane sheet. It's usually called bio-based polyurethane, but the bio-based isn't that significant. The bio-based sheet flooring, it looks like vinyl. It's a plastic. It's a vapor barrier. It's, you know, immune to like all the stains and everything, the same way that vinyl sheet. No plasticizers, basically no off-gassing. Harder to find for sure. And I think it's more expensive. I'm almost positive it's more expensive.
Of course it is.
Yeah. Natural linoleum in some cases, like for schools, some like a Montessori kind of type of school or something might want to go with a natural latex. So those are kind of the two sheet floorings that I would go with.
Okay, excellent. How about drywall? JC asks if you recommend magnesium oxide over regular drywall for mold resistance, or are there other wallboard finishes you recommend?
So drywall, regular drywall is usually 0 VOC. So there isn't really an off-gassing issue. It does have like really, really low amounts of mercury that come from either the synthetic or natural gypsum. But I would still use it. I used magnesium oxide board in my tiny house and I regretted it. It cracked like all over, and there's no benefit in terms of the VOC level. There's not much benefit other than like maybe for a bathroom or like a steam room where you like really couldn't have paper, but then there's still like the fiberglass backed options. There's a monolithic drywall, where the gypsum's mixed in with cellulose. So there's no like layer of paper that's like super vulnerable.
Oh.
My research into bathrooms is like to use a stain blocking primer and then like a pearl finish acrylic paint, just a regular latex paint. And that just helps the moisture not soak into the paper as much. Maybe you guys have a different opinion though, let me know.
Yeah. I mean, in general, I think if you're worried about drywall molding, then there's a problem other than the drywall itself. You should solve the cause and not use a product that's more resistant.
Stop the leak, get rid of the skunk. I'm with
Yes,
you,
get
Mike.
rid of the skunk. Right.
I'm like a very hot shower person. So my drywall is actually struggling. It's a rental, but the drywall is struggling. So I think, well, there's also only a window and not a fan. So I think if you solved it like on the fan side,
Yep.
it's a rental. So
So you can only do what you do. But
Yeah. How'd you know I was going to ask what your ventilation strategy was?
Source control.
Yes, get the moisture out as quickly as you can.
Yeah, for sure.
Or you can just, omit showers is the alternative. But that will create different problems outside of the home. But that's entirely up to you.
Yes,
I tried the shower thing.
What's that?
Tried the cold shower thing. It's not working for me. So
Rough.
No, it's terrible. I listened to the Huberman podcast on that and I was like, I don't think this is for me. This is definitely not for me. But in line with ventilation too, and in your experience, so this is a question from Scott in the chat. In your experience, does having an ERV help with fresh air exchange? And then there was another person, John, who said, do you recommend it even with somewhat leaky residences? So like when you have people who have existing, do you recommend ventilation? Does that help?
ventilation is way more helpful than like getting an air purifier, like a carbon standalone. Even if you can open your windows, and obviously if your like humidity like allows that and temperature, like ventilation is definitely the way to go. And that's where I would spend my money over the air purifiers. But you guys can speak to the part about the leaky building.
I will say I have one in my house with an 8.5 ACH blower door number, and the amount of dust we just collect from it, you know, because we live not too far from a limestone quarry and a concrete plant, so it's quite dusty in our house. So even though our blower door is high, I find it makes a big difference. And when we don't run it, it's a problem in our office, which is not necessarily environmental, other than we blow out a lot of CO2. Apparently we're full of hot air, and without the ventilation system, even in our leaky house, you know, we suffer adverse health outcomes due to just CO2.
Switching gears a little bit to furnishings, and asks, can you speak to the health aspects of foam used in furniture, cushions, mattresses, etc.? Are there any alternatives to foam-filled furnishings on the market?
So it's definitely different than two-part, though they're both polyurethanes. There is some low off-gassing, and there are some plasticizers in what they would call furniture foam. So that's the foam that's in all your couches and your chairs and most beds. There's no longer flame retardants. We seem to have at least eliminated that, even from like mainstream brands. So there are some sofa companies that make natural latex cushions and like substitute natural latex. That's really the only option we have that's like that's similar enough. So natural latex has a little bit of off-gassing as well. I think it's like 36 micrograms. Okay, but don't quote me on that. But it's low, and some of those VOCs are natural. So it does have that natural odor of latex, which does bother some people. So amongst really highly chemically sensitive people, I wouldn't say that natural latex is preferable to polyurethane, actually. It just hasn't turned out that way. That hasn't been the case. So ideally, you just have like a little bit of time to off-gas something because both options have some off-gassing.
Okay, how about somebody asks, is epoxy inert after it has set and dry? Things like epoxy adhesives, epoxy paints, fiberglass resin, laminated timber adhesives. Do you have experience with epoxy?
They usually, like, I know the coatings like that you'd use on a garage floor, they usually come to a complete cure, but it's somewhat similar to the concept of two-part spray foam in that like it doesn't always go as perfectly in real life. So like the mix, if it's not mixed perfectly, like there's going to be some off-gassing there for a while. And a lot of them are really harsh when wet. So I would look at the VOC level that they state and just know that it might take a little bit of time to get to that once it needs to mix and cure.
Right.
But then it will be fine. Well, and epoxy has BPA in case, depending on where you're using it, that may or may not be relevant.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just going to say we're drawing to the end of our hour, and I want to make sure that we do address the couple of specific questions in here for Corinne about, you know, are you currently offering consulting? What's the best way to contact you? I want to make sure you have the opportunity to wrap things up before we get cut off, because we have had so much engagement. A lot of these folks would like to reach you directly so that you can better help them with their specific issues. Is that something? Are you still offering consulting? Is that a thing?
I'm not offering one-on-one consulting right now. I do get to basically every comment on the website. The Facebook group, I also get to the comments if it's on like the latest post or the second latest post. I try to get to all the comments. I do recommend that people that are building who are really sensitive do find a consultant to work with. And I would start that before the building process, because I would approach the builder with some idea of what you need. Because if you come to the builder with just like this mismatch of like, I don't know, I'm super sensitive to everything, it's gonna, yeah, they might be really, I mean, it could just cause them a lot of problems. So if you come like with a really specific list of like, you know, I want to avoid oil-based paints and I want to try and just like a somewhat general list, that's going to go a lot better. So I would definitely suggest, even though I'm not doing it right now, to go with a consultant for green, not green, but like green building materials.
Do you, on that line, since you're not offering exact consultants, so it sounds like everybody can ask their questions, which is awesome. Do you have a way for people to determine who those people are, right? Like hire a consultant is great, but sometimes that's like, how do you find them, and how do you determine if you found somebody who is like
Trustworthy?
yourself?
Reputable, knowledgeable.
If you have chemical sensitivities, there's only like two people. There's Andy Pace and there's Paula Baker-Lepore. I'm not sure that anyone else is still offering that. There were a couple other people. So there's not a big group of people that really specialize. There's obviously people that specialize in like lead or like other related things, but if you actually have chemical sensitivity, those are the two people to go with.
I'd throw one more name out there, which would be Caroline Blazowski, for East
Mhm.
Coast people. I don't know that it's direct chemical sensitivity, but she's helped people who've had other kind of environmental sensitivities. And I know that she is putting on a healthy indoor air quality conference, I believe, sometime later this year. So keep your eyes out for that if there are people who are kind of interested in this topic professionally or are planning to build and can't get in with Paula or
Andy Pace, or someone asked for the names Andy Pace or Paula Baker-Lepore.
So ND Pace, is that?
Andy?
Andy Pace, sorry, I didn't, okay. Andy Pace and Paula Lepore.
yeah. Paula Baker report wrote this pretty really interesting book on, well, she's written several books. This one I like is a little more textbooky, has some great answers in it.
That's a good
She's
one.
Okay.
That's fantastic. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. This is not a, as you pointed out, a commonly understood problem that people are talking about on the street corner that you can just casually pick up information. So we really appreciate you sharing your experience and your presentation. Great conversation. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of need for more education on this side. So we may have to have you back.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, there is a lot of need for this kind of information, and the website gets updated daily because things are changing. Paula's book that Emily just showed is a great resource. But yeah, there's not a huge, there's a few key resources, especially for chemically sensitive folks. Definitely follow me on Facebook. That's like a really good place to just like keep up. I'm not really an Instagram person. But the Facebook will help you like stay up to date and like, yeah.
awesome. Thank you so much for
Yeah, thanks, Corinne. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks all who joined us. Have a wonderful night. We'll see you next month on BS and Beer.
No, we won't.
No, we
Oh
won't.
wait, that's right. We
We'll see you
won't.
all on
Yes,
Passive
next month
House
is Passive House
Accelerator.
Accelerator, Reimagine Buildings 24. We will see you in April.
Go support our
What
Passive
happens when
House
you leave me in
friends.
charge?
That's right. You're fired, Travis.
See you on the Passive House Accelerator. Thanks again. Good night.
Right.
Bye.